Well, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. My name is Father Alex. I'm the vicar of St Matthew's Church. I'm the host of the Godcast. I'm also the author of my book, Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, which is available in all good bookshops and on Amazon, etc., etc. So do check that out. My guest on the Godcast today is Cole Moreton, and Cole is a writer. He's a broadcaster. He's a public speaker. And we're going to be talking to him about his work and about his career and a few other things along the way as well. So I do hope you enjoy this interview now with Cole Moreton. Well, I am delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Cole Moreton. Cole is a writer, he's a broadcaster, he's a public speaker, man of many talents. Cole, it's wonderful to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
Great to be here. I've been watching some of the previous episodes. What a thing you've got going.
Well, thanks. Very kind of you to say, and hearing that from you, Cole's particularly flattering. So that's very kind. Thank you, Cole. We both had the pleasure of interviewing lots of people. Your guest list is maybe a little bit more A-list than mine, but I was wondering what you would say to people who watch or listen to you over the years about recent events in the UK. It's been all quite traumatic, hasn't it?
It's been a really tough week, hasn't it? And I've been hearing from Muslim friends in particularly that they have been frightened, terrified, afraid to go out and finding it hard to be on the streets. And I completely understand that and feel for that. I'm actually thinking about what I'm writing about it for this weekend for something. And I've been trying to look for the inspirational, the positive, the good stuff that's happening amongst it all. And obviously the first thing to say is all those people who turned out on Wednesday night to say, no, this is not right. And we love our neighbours and we're going to literally stand around them to protect them. That was a wonderful, inspiring thing. And then I've been reading stories about, there's a woman called Alex McCormick in Liverpool who did a GoFundMe page to replace the books that have been lost in Spellow Library, and she was trying to raise 500 quid. The last time I looked, they're on £200,000, which tells you something about the response all around the country and around the world. And then the other figure that I just think has been inspirational this week has been the Imam Adam Kelwick, I think his name is, in Liverpool, who, you know, they cooked burgers and chips in the kitchen of the mosque and took them out to these angry fascists outside and said, tell me about your life, I want to hear it. And they listened, which is as part of the theme of what I'm listened to. They began to realize that they had been chanting at people who were really human beings too. And they all had this kind of concern for Liverpool to be a better place. I'm not idealistic. I'm not naive. These are tiny pinpricks of light, but they are pinpricks of light.
Yeah, I was wondering, excuse me, Cole, you have interviewed some significant people from across the globe. I was wondering if you maybe draw on any of your conversations with people, and I want to come back to people like Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela. These are people that you've interviewed. Do you learn and draw on their experience of speaking to those people?
Well, I think yeah, I think I have interviewed some very famous people and some people who have extraordinary stories who are not famous at all. And I think the common theme that runs through them is kind of best summed up by the German Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, who talks about ways of seeing. And sometimes we see each other as an object. You're my bank manager, you're a refugee, you're a soldier, whatever it is. That's pretty random examples I've just plucked out of my head, but you know what I'm saying. But if you can get to the stage of listening, exchanging stories, beginning to see face to face and eye to eye the humanity in the other person, and people would say the electricity that is divine that runs between people, and I would say the spark of divinity in each other, then lives change and we connect on a much deeper level. And you mentioned Mandela would be one of the most famous people that I've written about. there is a person who, when he was in jail for a very, very long time, made it his business to personally connect with the people who were jailing him. And they became lifelong friends in the end when he was released. So, yeah, I think that's the common thread, that you're either seeing through a haze of celebrity where you're dazzled by the fame of the person, or you're seeing through a haze of prejudice if you're against what that person stands for, or just ignorance. But in all of these cases, the thing to do is slightly remove the gauze, if you like, and begin to try and listen, and hear the other person's story.
I think that's really interesting. I've just recently done an interview for a Salvation Army publication, and they look at the list of people that I've interviewed, and I've been very blessed. I've really done very well for somebody who hasn't really got a profile, but I've had some wonderful guests. But actually, I was really keen to point out, Cole, that it's not always the famous people. It's the conversations with the everyday person, isn't it? Can you recall any of those where you thought, gosh, they've actually blown me away there?
Yeah, definitely. I was doing a Radio 4 program called The Walk across Kensington, and it was about inequality in our cities. And it was going from Harrods Food Bank, where you can buy a bottle of Arctic water for 85 quid. That's just a bottle of water. And where the average life expectancy, I think, is up around 100. I was walking 3 miles across Kensington to the North Paddington Food Bank, where in the Moroccan community around there, the average life expectancy for men is down in the early 60s, and there's deep poverty happening. And on the way, I was talking to people that I came across. So, for example, I came across an estate agent who was selling £20 million houses. I came across a guy who had inherited 150 million on his birthday and given away almost all of it to charity. So some remarkable people. But when I got to North Paddington Food Bank, I met this woman, Sherilyn, who was from the Philippines. And she was a volunteer there. And as I began to listen to her story, she began to talk about how she'd been actually trafficked to Britain as a domestic slave. She'd escaped. She'd found a guy that she could make a life with. They got married. They'd had a kid. He'd had a bit of a breakdown. And they were really struggling. They were in that food bank initially because they just didn't know where else to go. And their benefits had, the benefit system has been a complete catastrophe, and the benefits had caused them great problem, or the lack of it. And Sherry was telling me her story, and I was blown away by the suffering that she'd been through. But I was more blown away that in the midst of all this, while she was still trying to hold it together for her family and her ailing husband and her child, she was volunteering at the food bank to help people who were less fortunate than her. I was absolutely staggered by her generosity and her courage and her perseverance. It was a beautiful thing. And I've got loads of examples of that, of people who are not famous. You've never heard of them, but my goodness, when you start to listen, their lives are extraordinary.
Yeah, I think these are some of the real heroes. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've published just the one book. I'm not as extensive as you, but I write about that as well. The people on the estates of Burnley, where there's numerous issues, actually how resilient these people are and how generous and charitable they are. They are themselves whilst receiving charity. Cole,
Alex, I need to just say something. I appreciate what you're saying about celebrity and everything, but I'm not a priest working in a difficult place at a real time of trouble, and I'm not doing the real job like you are on the ground. And also, when I look back over the Godcast episodes, I'm seeing really deep, genuine conversations with people who I might not otherwise have heard. So I take the deference, but I'm going to bounce it back to you and say you're doing a great job.
Oh, that's so kind. That really genuinely means a lot, Cole. Thank you. I was going to ask you about your preferred choices, because you're obviously a writer, broadcaster, interviewer. Do you have a preference, Cole? Do you prefer putting the pen to paper, or do you enjoy the interview? I guess that's by your reaction, maybe not the writing so much.
Well, the writing's blaming difficult. Yeah. I'll moderate my language. Look, the truth of the matter is, I've been a journalist since I was 15. I left school at 15 to join the local paper. And somebody interviewed me the other day, somebody in their 20s, and their first question was, it's incredibly difficult to make a living as a journalist these days. You've been doing it for X number of years. How have you done that? And the answer to that is that I'm like a polar bear jumping from melting ice flow to melting ice flow, doing whatever I can to tell stories. I had a bit of an epiphany when I was about 30. I was asked to do something at a Maundy Thursday service. I was asked to tell the story of the betrayal out in the garden of a church in North London in the dark. And then when we told the story of the betrayal, everybody would then drift off into the night. And I got really nervous about it, and I kind of really deeply prepared and got into the story and tried to understand. And as I was walking home from that experience, I realized at the age of 30 that my thing to do was to share stories and use stories to connect people. And as I've got older, it's become an emphasis. I mean, as a journalist, you kind of have to be a hustler. You have to say, look at me, look at my stories. But certainly over the last 5 or 10 years, it's become an emphasis on other people's stories to facilitate people's stories who wouldn't otherwise be heard. So I will do that in any way that I can, either in person, which I love to do. I'm available for bookings, or on the radio if they let me, and we're negotiating that because I've done a lot of radio, or in print. I don't really care, as long as I get to tell the story and make the connection and open up the reader or listener to what's being said.
Yeah, and what's your take on social media? Again, I did a local radio interview where the interview was alluding to, X as it is now, and Facebook is can be a real force for bad. But actually, I did challenge him back actually because I think it can be a force for good as well. Where do you sit with social media as a platform right now, Cole?
X is a tricky one, isn't it? I used to love Twitter, really did. I love the connections, the kind of random connections, but also the deep connections that were made on there. And I see lots and lots of friends going, I can't do this anymore, and I completely understand that. So I'm trying to work out what to do about that, which is a bit of a problem because X has been my main social media platform. So I'm like, well, how do I swap all these people over somewhere else? Facebook. Facebook has been a place for friends and family, so that's great. Instagram, I'm lucky enough to live on the south coast, and so I can take lots of pictures of the sea and sunsets that make my friends go, "Please, can you stop it now?" But I think a wider point. I used to make a living until 2016 as a columnist for the Independent on Sunday, and I had the best gig in journalism there, where they just said, look, you've got 2,000 words every week to talk about something that really matters. So I did that inequality project came out of that, for example. And then when it stopped, I went, like a lot of journalists do, I went, oh, well, I've got to keep sharing my thoughts. And so I thought, well, yeah, I'm gonna blog, I'm gonna post, and then I turned around and realized that everybody in the world is suddenly a columnist, except they haven't got any editors to tell them when they're talking nonsense. So it's become a very different field. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody wants to share it. And I celebrate that. I celebrate social media as a place of creativity and connection. And I also think we need to be very, very careful with it.
Yeah. And as a journalist, Cole, what's your view on more traditional platforms like BBC News, ITV News, Sky News, more latterly GB News, and every other station, Talk Radio, LBC. There's so many platforms, aren't there? Do you think they've got to bear some of the responsibility for this constant noise? Years ago, I was listening to a Radio 4 interview. I can't even remember who the journalist was, but he just said the press has become so narcissistic in recent times. They're just constantly throwing out sound bites because they've got to produce 24-hour news and entertainment. What's your thoughts?
I think that's too easy. I mean, a couple of thoughts. I think it's really interesting that you could list so many outlets. 10 or 20 years ago, we didn't have that. We just had big legacy media titles that everybody went to. Now, some of those titles that you've talked about there, like talk radio, are relatively new on the block, and then you mentioned the other kind of independent ones. There's a hell of a lot of choice, and I think I'm gonna throw it back. I think it's the responsibility of the consumer to choose the platforms that they trust. And one of the things that really kind of annoys me is my friends, who you might broadly characterize as centre or centre left, going, oh, the newspapers are all right wing. Well, yeah, they are. The big selling papers in Britain, or big selling titles, or ones that appear to be big selling, that's a whole other issue, because there's a whole reckoning coming for major mainstream titles. But the ones that appear to be popular are the ones where that seem to be either centre right or right. And that is because people in that community are willing to put their hands in their pocket and pay £3, £4, £5 a day to receive their news. And the problem has been, and I think it was partly fueled by the BBC putting making the website into the biggest kind of centre liberal kind of news gathering machine on the planet, and making it available for free, is that people on the centre and the centre left do not expect to have to pay for their responsible journalism anymore. So my answer to somebody who says that is, what are you paying for? What are you supporting? If you want authoritative, in-depth research by experienced journalists that look seriously at issues that you care about, you've got to pay for it. That's how it works. You can't just get it off the internet. And if you don't do that, it dies. So yeah, that's my challenge back.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Cole, I just want to we've talked about kind of the outside world. I'd like to talk about you for a little bit, if that's all right.
Please do, dear.
This is Cole's book, so people can see it.
Oh yeah.
Everything is extraordinary, which I've really enjoyed. And there was something I wanted to ask you about in there. There's a chapter on somebody who I'm very fond of, is Desmond Tutu, but not so much about him, but about one of the stories that you tell, where you are in the Holy Land, and you're in Bethsaida, and you're in the healing pools. Could you just share that experience, please? Because I think I find it really quite moving, and maybe continue to say a little bit about maybe how that has impacted your faith or not.
Yeah, please. Sure. I'm getting goosebumps just by you mentioning that. The background to this is that I was brought up in a kind of atheist socialist home, but my grandparents were in the Salvation Army. So I grew up knowing the language of faith through the Salvation Army. And then when I was a teenager, I had a fairly dramatic conversion to charismatic evangelical Christianity. And indeed, for a couple of years, I went away and worked as a missionary. In fact, I worked in relief and development camps across Asia and Africa. But it was under a kind of missionary banner. And when I came out of that, then I worked for the Church Times, and I had reported in depth on Anglican affairs. And there's nothing that helps you lose your faith quicker than writing in depth on Anglican affairs. So a combination of coming out of fairly extreme certainty of faith, and then becoming aware of the kind of problems of the institution, meant that, and also the difficulties of having IVF, trying for a kid and having IVF and it not working for a long time, meant that by December 24th, 1996, I had an anti-conversion experience. My heart was strangely chilled, and everything fell out of place. And so in the context of all that, everything having fallen apart for me, in 1999, I was invited to go with some wonderful maverick people from the church in Wales for The Independent to write a piece about pilgrimage. This outfit I think they're called Living Stones, where you go to the Holy Land sites, but you also go to meet Palestinian families, Palestinian Christians in the West Bank. So in the context of all that, I'm back in the kind of the motherland of it all, if you like. And I'm trying to work out what it is that I believe in, trying to find some kind of common ground with the firm believers from the Church in Wales that I'm with, but also trying to find something visceral, something elemental, that's the word, to connect with about faith in Jerusalem, which is a crazy place. You know, it's overwhelming. It's a sensory overload all the time. So in the middle of it, I'm trying to think, okay, well, yeah, but what is the elemental truth of all this? And so, as part of our tour, we went to the Pool of Bethesda, where the water stirred and where people were healed and where people waited for healing. And I was standing there down some steps, looking at water. It was just water, sandstone, and sky. And I was beginning to feel my way into this, trying to imagine. And then this guy came down the steps, Paul, his name was. And we'd barely spoken on the trip, but there was some sort of connection there. And he, I had my hands together, kind of, sort of prayer, and he reached down to the water and cupped the water and enclosed my hands with the water, so the water ran through my fingers, and didn't say a thing, just looked me in the eyes, and then left. And I just felt I was rubble, you know. I was like, oh, okay. So I suppose, what did I think? I thought, there is something here for me. There's something in the way that I'm feeling. There's some, I don't know what just happened, but I felt that kind of deep shaft of connection with everything. And the touch of another human being, you know, the cold of the water, and also just as if all of the kind of the history of the last couple of thousand years had just kind of melted away, and it was elemental and it was real and genuine. And I didn't run down the street shouting hallelujah, I'm a believer again now. Far from it. In fact, the next thing that happened was I was at the Western Wall, and I just had this, you know, it's really not very profound. Don't get yourself up for a profound revelation, but it was a revelation to me that in this place, in this tiny place, you know, the temple curtain had torn in two. Abraham had brought Isaac to be sacrificed. Muhammad had ascended to heaven on a white horse. You know, there was some kind of fractured dialogue going on between humanity and the divine, and this place was kind of like the central pillar of it. You know, all of the big stories were happening here, and I just realized that in my kind of unbelieving state, having lost my faith, that I couldn't deny it. I could not deny that conversation was going on between the divine and the human, and so I would have to find a new way to negotiate it.
And have you found a new way to negotiate it?
It's a journey, my friend.
Well, tell us. Where are you on the journey?
Where am I on the journey? People like to put a label, don't they? I love what Bono says in his autobiography. I'm a follower of Jesus who can't keep up. I like that. I came to faith and an understanding of the divine through the stories and person of Jesus Christ. And so that's my beginning place. But I also have increasingly become aware of the wisdom and community and generosity in other faiths and paths and traditions and creeds. So I am a member of the Methodist Church. At the same time, I'm also a co-founder of a thing called Wild Spirit on the South Coast, where we meet once a month in the open air to take in where we are, understand something about the history of it, do some meditative stuff, and look to encounter the sacred in the open air. And everything about Wild Spirit is phrased in a way that it is open to anyone of any faith or none. And so alongside me in that, I sometimes have, well, I've got pagan friends who come to that. I've got a Hindu friend who comes, and Christians of all kinds, and people with no faith. And so I'm starting from where I'm starting, but my journey is to look for common humanity.
You also write in the book about my favorite film, Kes, and you suggest that kind of the world is full of wonder to be explored explored through stories, and I'm just wondering just by what you've just described about that experience in the Holy Land is one of those stories that, we don't neither you or I know, but somebody might watch this over the weekend or 6 months or a year down the line and listen to that story, and it impacts their own journey of faith. And I think there's something quite profound in what you'd said there, because I've been very fortunate to go to the Holy Land twice. And the first time I was expecting this big, profound moment, and it never happened. And the second time I went, I went not expecting those things and found real beauty in the smaller events and the subtle accounts, or the moment that somebody might have been overcome by a moment of grief or joy or whatever it was. So I think there's something really important in what you say there. So in terms of stories, how do you think your story might end then?
Oh, well, I don't know. I'll answer that in a second, but I want to pick up. Can I pick up on a couple of things you
Yeah.
said? First of all, the Kes reference is a reference to walking up on the downs here and seeing with my son and seeing a kestrel hovering in midair and trying to take a photo of it, because we do, and ended up with lots of pictures of a dot, basically, and then realizing it was a futile experience and putting the camera down and just letting the moment happen and watching the bird and the sunshine on my son's face and the wind, and then just being caught up in the profound aspect of that moment. And it's in the book, and the book is called Everything is Extraordinary because of something that was said about the writer Clive James just before he died. I interviewed him just before he died, but his daughter said that in the last couple of months when he was housebound and he knew he was running out of time, because he had a lack of time, every moment became potentially precious to him, and he began to see the beauty in the small things like an apple or a mote of dust in the sunlight. And I found that profoundly moving. Having spent time with him there, I could see it in him and the change that had come about in him because of that. And I came out of that thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could have some of that without having to go through what he's going through? So it became my quest to look for the beautiful and the magical and the extraordinary in the ordinary. And the caveat to that is life is also crap, right? Life is also hard and difficult and painful. But you also find, as with Clive, that quite often in the pain, there are also moments of profound beauty. The pain intensifies the sadness, but there's also an intensity of beauty, if you're lucky. I can hear people going, not for me, it wasn't. No, I know, and I'm sorry, and I feel for you, but I'm just saying it's there if we can see it. Where does it end? You said, I don't know. I don't really care. It's about the journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't really have the capacity to answer that question, Alex, because it might end, we might finish this conversation and it might all end for me 2 minutes later. I've no idea. Life is like that. But for the moment, I'm enjoying the journey. I'm enjoying trying to work it all out. I'm looking for community. I'm looking for people to talk to. I'm looking for stories to hear. And I'll just go wherever it takes me.
Yeah. I was going to kind of bring things to a close, but I can't not respond to what you'd said about Clive James. And again, in my book, and I suppose it's my podcast, so I can plug my own book. But I write about my father with dementia, who died from dementia, and that suffering was pretty horrific for him. But for me, it was quite a profound experience of really getting to understand my dad, to love my dad when he really needed it in those darkest moments, to pull his trousers up when he defecated himself in Morrison's, and to just sit with him. I learned an awful lot about love in that situation. And I think what you described there about Clive was similar in understanding things that mean something and the beauty of something as well. So I'm really, really grateful that you'd said what you did. Cole, I mean, you're normally the interviewer, so I want to know if there's anything I should ask you that I haven't.
I think you've done a pretty good job, Alex. Really,
Oh, thanks.
to be honest. Since you plugged your stuff, I'm going to plug mine then.
Of course, go for it.
So Everything is Extraordinary. It's published by Hodders, Hod of Faith, and it's out there. Do have a look. Do please review it. I mean, reviews apparently help. Even if you don't buy your books from Amazon, reviewing them on there apparently helps. It was born out of a podcast called Can We Talk, and that is available on all platforms for free. So if you want to start and engage with some of the stories, you can do that. Can We Talk? And the only other thing to say is, look, to anybody who's listening to this and wants to respond to any of it, I am completely available. I'm available to talk to you. I'm available to message you on social media as Cole Morton on all those platforms. Currently, at the moment, going around the country doing evenings where I start the first half of the evening by telling some of the stories about Scarlett Johansson, Tiger Woods, Sherry, who we talked about, the Queen, and then in the second half, helping people in a community to hear the stories from each other. So I'll say, for example, who's the most remarkable person you've ever met? And then we have an hour or so of people telling their stories, and I'm facilitating that. And I've seen that completely change communities, churches, groups, people, places where people have brought different kind of communities together. That sharing of the stories, that facilitating and sharing of the stories, I'm totally available to anybody who wants me to do that. And also I'm available to anybody who wants me to help them tell their story. So basically I'm available. I'm basically a tart, is what I'm saying, Alex. But the whole theme of it is, if we share stories, if we see each other and listen to each other like we've done today, and I was going to say, I'm sorry about your dad. I also recognize, because I've been through something with my own dad lately, where I think this is horrible and it's painful, and it's also beautiful that I can do this for him, in the way that you're talking about. So when we share, when we connect, when we see each other for who we are and not as something else, to pick up the theme of the week, then God is there. God's present. I believe that. However you want to define God, God is present.
I'm into that, brother. I'm into that, most definitely. Cole, I've really enjoyed it. I know it's been a good podcast because it's absolutely gone by in a heartbeat. And if people have enjoyed listening to Cole, then do check out the Godcast. There are hundreds of people from faith, from celebrity, from politics, from music, and comedy, all my favorite subjects. And Cole, all that remains is to say thank you. Thanks for coming on the Godcast.
Thanks, Alex. It's been an honor. Thank you.